I think that's just been an incredible, exciting time to be working in product and be a builder right now, because there's just so much of what I would consider to be the not fun parts, the taxing, difficult parts, are now a lot easier, a lot more accelerated. And it's just a really awesome time to be in the middle of it. It's also scary because I think with it comes a lot of the disruptions, right?
Tell me about who you are and your role, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah, sure. So I'm Josh. I'm the head of product at RepVue. You can think of RepVue as similar to Glassdoor, but we're vertical to sales and go-to-market professionals. And so one of the problems that we were really focused on for that audience is working in tech sales specifically. There can be a lot of information asymmetry in terms of your role that you're considering taking at a new company and the reality of the situation. So that could be things like promising really high OTE for variable earnings, but in reality, very little people are hitting quota. That could be that your management isn't very good. That could be that your territory's allocation might not be very good. So there's just a lot of scenarios in which that profession can run into situations that are completely out of their control and then lead to a subpar career situation. And so for us, I think my founder, Ryan Walsh, that was his goal in starting and founding RepVue, which was to reduce that information asymmetry and then allow them to make educated career decisions. And so our goal going forward and our vision is to be that ultimate sales career resource for sales professionals that's with them along the way as they make major career decisions, and then also the little moments in between as well.
That's great. Very mission driven. I love that. So, as the VP of product, what is a normal day like for you?
Yeah, so I think RepVue's product team is me, our designer, Catherine, our VP of engineering, Jeff, and then the remainder of our engineering team, which is 4 developers, Sandra, Trent, Freddie, and Mika. And so we're not like a huge team, or it's really the band of us. And really what I think about the day-to-day is I'm managing strategy, discovery, and delivery across all 3 of our platforms. And so that could look like anything from dealing with these big picture strategy questions. Hey, SEO is shifting from 10 blue links to citation via things like Perplexity and even Google overview, AI overview experiences. What does that mean for our acquisition and SEO strategy and our user growth and rating strategy? To little things like last week, I'm just in the weeds manually testing the features. We had some new features going out last week that was working on our what's the repeat rating user experience, which is just me going through and actually manually testing. So to me, it is humbling in that, again, I think it's important that all of it gets covered, right?
Yeah.
There is no, I'm a big believer in no one's above any activity or task in terms of the goal is to get out there and ultimately deliver a product that delights users and is easy and good to use and is ultimately results in a business that's profitable and optimized for our audience. And for me, I think VP product comes into any one of those things from dealing and answering those high-level strategy questions to being a product analyst doing the manual UAT. So I think it's all of it and everything in between.
No, yeah, ain't that the truth? Do you consider, is RepVue considered like a startup? Would you consider yourself? Yeah.
For sure.
Okay.
Yep.
So then you just have to do everything, right?
No, absolutely. Yeah.
And so how do you think about managing your day and your time? Because obviously that's like the most precious resource.
To me, the biggest learning as I've gone through this role is understanding that you can't just leverage all of your energy into different levels of tasks from the strategy to the tactical to require different levels of energy. And so for me, I think the biggest learning I had was in earlier parts of my role, I'd think, oh, I just need to answer these really 3 to 5 big questions, right? And I'd try to tackle it all at once. And I think the reality is like you can only have so much deep think time. And that's really like probably 3-ish hours a day. And then you got to spread the rest of your time amongst the tactical, amongst the day-to-day, the things that are more mundane, but still really important. And so for me, I think the biggest thing is in terms of structuring the day, I've always got to be practical. And what I pick is what is that one big thing that I'm going to focus on that requires most of the mental energy, and then spacing out the rest of it to make sure that we still stay on track of our goals. So to me, this always comes down to I think the temptation in a role like this is to always just jump in and start doing stuff. But I find that first 15 minutes of the day where you say, what are all the things that I could get done? What will I get done and how will I mark progress? And that's where I just do this simple time box exercise, try to plan my day. The first half of the day is intentionally unstructured, and that I try to say, there's this big goal and I have like a 3-hour block of time. I'm going to just work on this and see where I land. And then the rest of the things are more concrete, right? Yeah, I need to finish writing requirements for something. I need to make sure I hand off testing feedback on this feature. And those are more dedicated throughout the day. So I think to me, like that first 15 minutes of structuring, like what will I commit to getting done or making progress on in that day is really where I find I'll either win or lose the day in terms of having a productive, get everything I need to get done for that day, is whether I do that 15 minutes properly or not.
So it's really just about setting up your day and mentally understanding what you're trying to get done. So I'm curious how the tool stack that you're using to manage your day and your time, and where does Hoop fit into that?
Yeah, so it fits into that first piece of it where like I'm doing the ultimate task tracking and also structuring of what gets done. So I actually have a bucket in Hoop called current focus or finishing today. And that's really ultimately where I take everything from incoming, which is where Hoop is tracking all of the things that could come up in Slack, in my meetings. I'll take a mixture of those and then a mixture of my own created tasks and then put that into the, hey, here's how I'm structuring it. And then from there, I'll just actually take that list and then create calendar blocks for myself in terms of what I want to finish and when.
How were you keeping track of everything before Hoop?
That was the big problem, is it's all over the place. I think I was tracking most things in Notion and just like a somewhat structured Notion doc. But yeah, I always just felt like nothing with the Notion doc. I feel like it's hard to really feel like you're making progress. And I think that the most difficult thing, and where I think Hoop is critical, is it's the action of taking down the task when it happens, right? And there's always the little things, the feedback that you get in a meeting, in a one-on-one, that again, if you don't remember to take the time to sit down and craft those tasks to list them out, then the list is only as useful as your ability to follow through with it. And I think on some things, there's just, the amount of feedback that is coming my way from all the various departments, from all the various Slacks. Like, I'm sure we've all felt that before. If you've worked in product, is like, there's just a lot of incoming. Like you inherently touch just every function and department in some companies. And there's just always a lot of things coming your way. And I think it was challenging to just have that list have the right fidelity and level of detail that it needed to be practically useful, which is fine. I think you still manage to survive, but I think that's the really nice thing about Hoop is that it's tracked and it's written down somewhere. It's still up to me to decide whether I'm going to prioritize it, which I think is also the important piece, but I'd rather have visibility than not. And I think that's where Hoop has been a really big game changer for me.
Do you think the value is in the not forgetting, or everything's in one spot, or specifically in your role, what's the real benefit?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, it's the benefit of visibility, but two, I use Hoop in a couple of different ways. And I was talking to the team a little bit about some of the different ways that I can use it. So a lot of the old work that I would do manually in terms of maybe writing requirements or a PRD, I will actually use I'm now using a Claude project. And for those that haven't heard of him, Tal Raviv, who was on Lenny's podcast, he talked about being the super ICPM. And I followed his content and his approach. And I think a lot of what he's doing is really genius in that you can take the bits and pieces of context that are in your meeting or things that you want to maybe just verbally dictate in terms of giving direction. And so I've taken his approach of making a Claude project and giving it a long prompt of, hey, you're an expert product advisor. I'm going to help. I need your help on crafting a PRD. And I'll take that prompt and then put it together with the task specific prompt. And then as part of that task specific prompt, so let's just say like a PRD, for example, I'll say, help me write these. I have like my format of how I want to write a PRD. Here are the 5 sections. What are we doing? Why is it important? How do we know this is a real problem? What does it look like? And I'll take that and I'll actually go into Hoop and actually take a meeting transcript. I'll go back into my events or I'll go back into my to-dos and navigate the relevant transcripts. And I'll actually just drop in as part of the prompts the various contexts that might have been had in a meeting or in a Slack. And then also on top of that, I use better dictation to actually talk to Claude and give it all this context. And so I find that Hoop is really helpful in that sometimes in that process, winning and losing is finding all of the different places in which a conversation was had. Was it an email? Was it in Slack? Was it in a meeting transcript? And it's really great to be able to go back and grab those snippets and then add it to my contacts, which then sharpens the output of the PRD or the ticket or whatever I'm doing, the test plan. I found that to be really helpful, and Hoop is just, again, a great way to have that context handy and be able to track down more specific things as I think about the work that I'm doing in the cloud projects with LLMs.
That's really cool. So you mentioned that was one of the workflows. What are some of the other ones?
Yeah, I think to me, I've really tried to commit to anything that is the repeatable, again, the mundane, but really critically important. For example, I have a weekly Tuesday meeting. And one thing that I try to commit to is everything that is a weekly routine, it should be done through a prompt. And so that could be like, hey, ultimately my process on drafting the weekly report is we have our OKRs, we have dashboards, I need to go look at it and write commentary on where we're tracking, what's coming next. It's like your standard status report. Again, not like the highest value activity in terms of all the different ways my time can be split, but it's important, and that's where conversations are generated in terms of what we're working on and the direction we're heading, and whether we're at risk or on target to hit our goals. And so for me, like even just putting together I need you to help me prepare this weekly update. It covers these general content areas. This is I'm going to feed you screenshots of dashboards, or giving it some context into how to know where things are trending, generate the report, and then give it to me. And things like that, things like I mentioned, UAT is one of the more painful things. So even things like, hey, I've been using ChatGPT Operator to create new test users, because again, there's just like a 60-second process. But for example, last week I needed to create something like 40 to 100 test users. Tell ChatGPT Operator, go create 100 users. And so it'll go do it in our staging environment, which is really helpful. I think just things like that where, to me, if I were assessing a new product manager, I would think about like, how are you generating leverage by taking the routine and the mundane? It's still important, but taking that and thinking through the right prompts and tools to automate it, or at least get 60 to 80% of it done before you're giving feedback on it. And I think that's just been an incredible, exciting time to be working in product and be a builder right now, because there's just so much of what I would consider to be the not fun parts, the taxing, difficult parts, are now a lot easier, a lot more accelerated. And it's just a really awesome time to be in the middle of it. It's also scary because I think with it comes a lot of the disruptions, right? I think, again, I would just lean towards the optimistic side of, man, I feel like there's just so much leverage we're able to get by employing these tools in the day-to-day stuff.
It's so true. I think one thing that you have to do is just, like you said, recognize that moment of, am I doing something repeatable, or how have you thought about moments when you should bring in some sort of AI workflow, or moments where it would take too long, or you're not 100% sure what kind of workflow even. So I think an area where a lot of people struggle is knowing when and how to incorporate different AI tools or frameworks or workflows.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's a great question. I thought about this a lot myself. And so what I would say is, like last week, surprisingly, one of the things that I actually have some regrets in implementing is like in our UAT process, like ultimately I'm the last person that signs off on the product before it goes. And in the last couple of weeks, I've just noticed, oh, wow, when I've delegated that process, sometimes there are just details that we've missed, right? And that usually would get caught when I give the feedback. And so for me, it's important that what we're launching at the very last step of the process, even though that's the most mundane task, it's where ultimately it meets the quality check or it doesn't. You have to trust AI. Does AI have the taste and craft and understanding of how you want your product to look and feel? And I'd say in a lot of areas it doesn't, right? Yeah. Maybe that's something that could improve, but I would say for my experiences it doesn't. And I would say where that was one item for me is where taste and craft are involved. That is where I couldn't imagine more a human should be involved in driving, right? Is those really minute details. Where there are more, I think, repeatable, mundane, and ultimately things where the end output is sufficient to be like, hey, I'm summarizing, I am generating a repeatable process, which again, I know is in product, there's no shortage of those. Things like generating test cases, things like writing requirements, all of those things where I think, again, if it's more about, for me, I've developed the way I know I want my PRDs to look and all the essential components of it. So if I'm able to craft that template and know that if I provide Claude or any of these LLMs, because it's a horse race, every day there's an advancement, if all of them could ultimately grab the context of what I'm providing the instruction on and at least output something that is, again, as, like I said, 80% good enough, I think that's where I also look for like key opportunities. And I think the kicker there is it's always, if you're taking a big risk, if you trust it to do all of it and just go, there's no review on the human side. But I think to me, like this idea of like where there is an opportunity to provide it with a really detailed context prompt, I think you'll find like some ways to be successful. And so that's where I've thought about like, again, where it should be employed versus, The biggest thing for me that I've found in the last couple of weeks is like where craft and taste are involved, and where again you want to be like leaned into the details. That's where it's a really bad idea. Even if again it's really tactical, doesn't necessarily mean that's a good idea to delegate, because you might miss the details and on the critical piece of, hey, does this look and feel the way that I want it to?
I love that. That's almost like a framework right there, where it's like the first question of the framework, is this repeatable, or is this something I could automate or bring AI into? And then the second question is, however, does it involve taste and craft? And or, because there could be, those things could be distinct, but it's super helpful to think about. And it also, if you have to train your mind, because so many of us aren't used to AI, or don't even, until you see a use case, you're like, oh, I didn't realize I could do that with ChatGPT or with Claude or whatever. As folks are thinking about using AI in their workflows, where you mentioned this Lenny's podcast, are there other thought leaders or podcasts that you like to listen to, or where you get inspiration for workflows?
Yeah, I'm trying to think now. What are some of the? I think so. Tal and his playbook. I've got his playbook. Like that's been super helpful, and I think it's really pushed the boundaries of what I think is doable in those tools. Like one example is some of Tal's prompts talk about, hey, I'm going to give you like my performance review, and I want you to consider this as I do all of these things, or I want you to make again. I need to have a really difficult conversation with my boss, or hey, this is like the water cooler gossip talk, and I think like to me like. Those are things that have led to like other sources that I've looked into. A lot of it is like things people I follow on Twitter. The names are escaping me. The thing that I find is the core, like what I think is like all of our responsibilities in product and just being on top of all these processes. Like every single week there's like a new model or there's some new advancement, and it's like a DeepSeek comes out, chain of thought, and I just think like staying on top of all of it wherever you can, and also just understanding. I think the biggest thing is I'm trying to allow myself a lot more time and space to just play with these tools, because I think it's like the concept of basic versus applied research. There's no practical objective in mind, and I can give you one example of what I found. Claude will sometimes start to generate code in its responses, and every time I was like, what are you doing? I don't need code. And so I'd stop it. One time I just let it finish what it was doing, and what it was doing was it was like generating a prototype of what I was talking about, because I'd given it a screenshot of, hey, I saw a conversion dip on this funnel, and it was great. And I was like, oh, okay, this is what it was doing, is it's generating a visual for me to talk through. And actually like me and my designer just collaborated in like messing with the prototype. We gave it feedback. It's, hey, we want to maybe do a sticky CTA on the bottom. And so to me, sometimes you should think through playing and putting aside time with, let me just mess around with these tools and see what they can do. And even just settling for, people are like, what should I automate? What should I not? I take the mindset of, I'm going to make a prompt, and that prompt might get like 30% right and the rest of it wrong, and it's not helpful and it's actually creating work. I think it's still important that you start from that the next week and then figure out, what did I get wrong? How would I change the prompt? And just commit to making, again, it's very trite and commonplace, but making that iterative improvement, right? This output didn't hit the mark on a lot of elements, but maybe it did in this space. So I'll keep this prompt in place next week. I'll give it more feedback, and I'll try to just make more incremental improvement. And I think if you take that approach, you'll find, okay, like I have taken 3 different tasks that usually take me anywhere from 4 to 6 hours, and hopefully maybe that gets down to 1.5 to 2 hours. And so I think just taking some of that attitude towards it as well, because believe me, like nothing more frustrating than like trying and it gets it completely wrong. I think trying to make some smaller improvements and get better along the way is also important there.
Yeah, I feel that's always my advice. I feel like is the giving yourself time to tinker, not even time, but like permission to tinker, because I think that it can be overwhelming when you see all of these statistics about how using AI makes you more productive, and you're like, oh my God, I should be using this or doing this, and you're like, you got to take off the pressure, I think. And I love how you're suggesting making it more playful, and I think that removes a lot of the pressure, or especially in a field like product, or I do a lot of marketing, and being completely transformed by what you can do with AI. But as you said, also it comes down to craft and taste, and that's where you still really very much need a human involved. Let me ask you 2 final questions. If somebody is considering Hoop but not sure, what would you tell that person?
Yeah, I think if you're someone that is extremely meeting heavy or juggling a lot of different contexts, Hoop can only help you in that it is helpful to have all of these things tracked, and it's helpful to have a running list of these things where ultimately like you don't have to be the one responsible for taking that action of writing it all down. And so I'd say definitely the use cases for a lot of people, if you're busy, if you're back to back in meetings, if you're juggling a lot of contexts, this can only serve to help you fill in a lot of those details. I'm a big believer that and what I felt in this job is in a startup, you're juggling all of the responsibilities, you're trying to make progress on a lot of fronts. I think ultimately hitting our goals sometimes comes down to, did we get deep enough into the details and execution and at all levels to make sure that we were aligned on the problem and the solution. I just feel like Hoop is an instrumental part of helping me do that. And also, again, makes it easier for me to work with my cross-functional partners. So again, they depend on me for a lot of things. And I just want to make sure that I have a clear line of sight. Again, Hoop is like the visibility increase. I don't even know what the percentage is, but it's just this insane improvement, visibility into all of the tasks, questions, expectations that my cross-functional partners had. And I just find this incredibly valuable tool and is an indispensable part of my workflow right now.
Well, obviously, I love to hear that. So thank you. And then last question is just if you're a person who wants to learn more about AI and you're just getting started or you're exploring, I think about this AI curious person, what would be your advice for the AI curious person beyond just allowing room for play?
Yeah, I think for the AI curious person, number one, it's take a look at your day, think through what can be leveraged, what could leverage an LLM or an AI tool going forward, and take like small pieces and bits at trying to work more towards migrating your core workflows into like something that does leverage AI. And then two, like the secondary thing I would say is there are a lot of voices like Tall. There's a lot of voices that are, again, really working on establishing a point of view on this. I would say it's not a bad idea to think about, again, taking a course from some of those people. I know Tall has course offerings. I would just be a big believer in, first and foremost, play with the tools first, and then get aligned to some of this formal education and training. Just because, again, I think this is just changing so rapidly, right?
Yeah.
I find that people that traditionally the view is like, oh, there's one tool, there's one platform, right? What's that one platform and what's like the very rigid framework of how I should use it? Everything that I'm prompting today might be completely changed in the next 2 months. And so I just think it's important that you try things, some experts out there. I would say, as you can see, gravitated toward Tall and his content because I find that he's at the forefront of being really curious and trying new things. Follow those experts. And then don't hesitate to change things up. One example is Grok 3 came out last week. Maybe take all your workflows that you typically do in Claude and try Grok 3 for a week. I think those are just things that I would think about. If you want to try and be on as close to the edge of this as possible, you're only going to get there if you're open to new ideas, and things are going to be changing rapidly week over week.
Thank you so much, Josh. This was so much fun.